Debashish and Suchita for calling me once again to Money Life. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad that we are starting this series of lectures or talks on the basics of income tax. As a practicing chartered accountant, having dealt with clients from different sectors, different types of clients, I'm 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 confident that the literacy levels as far as taxation is concerned in the country are very pitiable, and people just don't know things about tax, and therefore it's and it's not that as a chartered accountant I love that the tax laws are complex because it gives me more work. That is of course there, that the more complex the laws, the more the demand for chartered accountants. But the point is that for us as professionals, at least to the type of breed of CAs that I belong to, it's a big headache if the client is not tax literate. We would love to have a person who understands taxes, who understands the problems that we face while dealing with taxation, and keeps his or her house in order, because then it makes life easy for us in terms of advising the client, in terms of doing the compliances. So therefore, as we go forward, if we have more lectures where I am also there, my objective would be to try and touch the basics and get them instilled in you, so that you understand why certain provisions of the law are there and why certain problems occur, both from the taxpayer side, from the tax consultant side, and from the department side. Unless we understand each other's problems, I think there cannot be a win-win situation. Of course, in tax, there is nothing like a win-win situation. Taxpayer always feels he is losing, and the tax department always feels that that guy is a crook and he is not paid what he is supposed to. But I think with the kind of proactive government that we have today, while there may be different views on that, but I feel it is a proactive government and is trying to reach out to people and understand and solve the problems. I think if ever there was a time when we could have solved our problems, at least on the tax front, this is it. If this point of time goes away in our lives, I think we have a very dismal future as far as cooperation is concerned. So therefore, going forward, this would be our endeavor. Today's talk is on TDS. The question is it TDS? Is it tedious or a complete TDS? I think by the end of the day, let's all decide what it is. What is TDS? So as I said, let's look at the very basics, because unless we understand why TDS is there, what is TDS, we will not appreciate the issues that come up in terms of TDS. So first of all, TDS aims at collection of revenue at the very source of income. What? Tax deducted at source. So at the source of the income, the tax gets deducted. It is essentially an indirect method, therefore, of collecting tax, which combines the concept of pay as you earn and collect as it is being earned. The mechanism of TDS therefore puts the onus of compliance on the person or on the company, on the entity that pays a particular sum of money to somebody else. So the government has basically outsourced the duty of the government of revenue collection onto certain categories of people, and tax is deducted at the time while making payments, or at the time of credit, which is very important to understand, that it is not merely tax deduction does not happen at the time of only payment, but it has to happen at the time of the credit into the books of the payer, or at the time of payment, whichever is earlier. So the incidence of deduction of tax is preponed to either the date of credit in the books or to the date of payment, whichever is earlier, and then it is deposited into the government treasury. The objective of TDS is to spread the burden of tax payment by paying taxes as it is earned, to ensure effective collection of taxes, and for the timely mobilization of the internal revenues. But very importantly, and this is becoming more and more important from the government's perspective, from the income tax department's perspective, is that it is an important source of information for ascertaining the income and expenditure of a taxpayer during assessments. The TDS returns that the deductors file are a gold mine as far as the tax department is concerned, because based on that they are assessing the people in this room, the people outside the room, it's a gold mine of information for the tax department. So that is something that we need to keep in mind. Advantages, I mean, I don't know whether anybody will say there can be advantages, but there are. The advantages are, first of all, it shares the responsibility between the deductor and the tax collection agencies. This is obviously from the government's perspective, part of the burden is passed on. It prevents tax evasion, it's good for the country. Widens the tax collection base, definitely good for the country, because we have a very pitiable number of taxpayers in the country as compared to 125 crores that we have of people. Steady source of revenue for the government. If you are doing a business, you would know that for business you need working capital for daily expenses, for salaries, for rent, for electricity. The government is also like an organization. The government also requires working capital. It has to pay salaries to the government servants. It has to pay all kinds of operational expenses. So basically, TDS is a form of working capital for the government, and it is easier for a deductee. The concept of TDS has an advantage from a deductee's perspective, because the deductee, the tax gets automatically deducted or collected and deposited to the central government, and therefore we as taxpayers don't have the headache of paying that separately to the government. So that is one headache taken away from the taxpayers' shoulders. So those of you who are salaried people, for example, you would know that from your salary tax gets deducted. Let us take a situation where TDS is not there, the employer does not deduct tax. Then obviously you will need to yourself pay the tax. So that is a headache, because every 3 months you will have to pay advance tax, fill up a challan, go to the bank, make the payment, etc. So that headache is taken away from the deductees by virtue of the TDS provisions. So what are the different sections in the advertisement for this particular talk? It was said that I'll refer to the whys and the what and when and the different sections. So these are the different sections. Now you need not bother about how many sections are there, etc. The only objective of putting this slide before you is to demonstrate how complicated life has become for a tax deductor as well as a tax deductee. Let's take the first one, section 192, which asks an employer to deduct tax from the salary paid to the employees in certain, obviously if the salary income is above taxable limit. When to deduct? The employer has to deduct on a monthly basis. Every month the salary is paid, every month the tax is deducted. Interest on securities, let's for the time being keep it aside, it is hardly relevant now. But 194A, which I'm sure most people in this room or at your home would be facing, this is 194A, where tax gets deducted from interest other than interest on security. So you have a bank interest, you have a FD, you have a deposit with a fixed deposit with a company, for example, those kind of interests, or you are given a loan to someone and that person pays you interest. That interest will attract TDS under section 194A, and at the time of credit or payment, whichever is earlier, that person who is paying you interest or who is supposed to pay you interest, that person will have to deduct the tax at source. 194B, winning from lotteries and puzzles. Most common people, we are not concerned with it, but just on a lighter vein, when we watch TV shows like Jhalak Dikhla Ja or all that kind of stuff, Kaun Banega Karodpati, Mr. Bachchan, who is right now at the center of a big controversy, he uses a fancy mob-like pen and signs the check for 1 crore rupees and shows it, Axis Bank check, and they display it. That is all crap, because that check will be taken back immediately after the camera is switched off, because they cannot give a 1 crore check because they have to deduct tax at source. So winnings from lotteries, puzzles, game shows, etc. attract a tax which is at the highest rate. So that 1 crore never goes to that, we will get only after the tax is deducted. 194C, another very important area of tax deduction in the country, where the payments to contractors or subcontractors, which would include ad agencies, etc., tax deducted at source from the payments made to the contractor. So if a company, for example, if Moneylife takes over 1 or 2 more units on this floor and is doing up the place, they engage some carpenter, they engage a mason and all the plumbers and etc., and get the work done. If at the time of recording the bill of that particular contractor, Money Life, the company, will have to deduct tax at source from the bill raised by the contractor. Similarly, ad agencies. If a company gives an ad to some ad agency, the advertisement revenue paid to that particular agency will attract a TDS under 194C. 194D, insurance commission, not very relevant here. 194H, commission and brokerage, other commission and brokerage, that attracts TDS. Not many people are aware of this, but for example, again, same example of Money Life, taking the next opposite office on rent. It does the deal through a real estate agent and has to pay, say 1 month's rent to that fellow as brokerage. They will have to deduct tax from the commission or the brokerage paid. 194I is in respect of rent paid. So when a rent is paid either for land or building or for plant and machinery, again TDS provisions apply. 194B talks about rent from land and building, and 194A talks of rent from plant and machinery. The classification is there only for the purpose of challan, that while entering the figures in the tax payment challan. 194J, which concerns people like me, where we get professional fees or fees for technical services, fees paid to an architect, to a doctor, to an engineer, to a chartered accountant, to a lawyer, etc. All these kind of fees will be covered under 194J and would attract a TDS. 194IA, which came in a few years back, which affects everyone in this room, because when you are buying a house, an immovable property other than an agricultural land, at the time of buying that property, if the value exceeds 50 lakhs, then we as a buyer, we have to deduct tax at source under 194IA from the payment made to the seller. Even if it is you're buying from the builder itself directly, it is an under construction property, yet we will have to deduct tax at source under 194IA. And most of the other sections do not apply to a normal individual, meaning a person who is not engaged in business. But 194IA, there is no exception except for the threshold limit of 50 lakhs. As a common man, a salaried person also, if he is out to buy a house which is costing more than 50 lakhs, this section will apply. On the other hand, a salaried person paying fees to me for helping him or her file a return of income, that person will not have to deduct tax at source. Just an example to illustrate the differentiation between these kind of sections. There are some instances where tax is not deductible. So TDS is not collected on payments made to the RBI or to the government of India. TDS will not be collected when interest is credited or paid to a central or state financial corporation, to banking companies. So for when companies take loans from banks and they pay interest to the bank, there is no TDS from that particular payment. Interest paid by the income tax department to us, if at all, if at all you get interest from the tax department on the refund that we get, then on that also there is no TDS, except in the case of non-resident. So if you have a non-resident relative who has filed a return, who has got a refund due, from that the department will definitely deduct TDS under section 195. And so on and so forth, like Indira Vikas Patra and the Kisan Vikas Patra, NSC, etc. do not attract TDS. From a NRI perspective, the most important kind of investment is the NRE deposits. So on NRE deposits, again, there is no TDS, primarily because the interest itself is exempt from tax. And similarly, if there are any other institution notified for the purpose of exemption from the TDS provisions. How it works, very broadly, the payer of the income or the money deducts the tax, it pays it or deposits the money to the credit of the central government. Then that deductor has to file the quarterly TDS statements, or some people call it TDS returns, but technically they are called as statements of TDS. Then the payer issues the TDS certificate to the payee, and finally the payee, that is we, the end recipient of the income, will claim credit for the TDS in the return of income that we file at our individual end. So this is broadly the process. What are the rates? Again, it is just for academic interest. For salaries, there is no rate of tax, unlike all other sections where there is a particular rate prescribed. The reason being that salary is always paid to an individual. and individuals are subject to the slab rates. Somebody may be in the zero rate because the income does not exceed 2.5 lakhs. Somebody may be in the 10% rate when the income is between 2.5 to 5. Somebody may be in the 20% rate by when the income is between 5 and 10, and 30% if the income exceeds 10 lakhs. So depending on the taxable salary paid to a particular person, the deductor will have to calculate the taxable income of that employee, calculate the total tax liability on that salary income, and then deduct. So it could be different for every employee. Interest on the bank interest, what you get from banks, 10% if the interest in the whole year exceeds 10,000 rupees. There is a whole big issue relating to interest on bank FD, which Mr. Datar had also pointed out. I'll deal with that separately, so I'm not getting into the details about this just now. But it's very, very interesting and heartbreaking, examples. Lotteries and puzzles winning 10,000. If it exceeds 10,000, then 30%, straight away 30%. Contractors is 2% and 1% depending on the kind of contract and whether it is a subcontractor, etc. But here, just to explain why our laws become complicated, this is a classic example. That long back the limit for contractual payments to attract TDS was 20,000. So what people were understanding was that if I make a contractual payment which is not exceeding 20,000, then there is no need to deduct tax. So far so good. Then intelligent people started taking a stand that 20,000 limit applies to every contract. So for example, I'm an architect, I engage a carpenter to do some work for all my projects. So for every project, I enter into a separate contract with him. Every contract is 18,000 worth. Okay, so 18,000 did not cross the 20,000 limit. Therefore, every time I made a payment to that chap for every contract, I did not deduct tax. And that's how people started avoiding the TDS. Whereas that was never the intention. Probably the intention was that at the end of for the whole year, if the limit of 20,000 is crossed, then you need to deduct the tax. So, because of these kind of intelligent and ingenious interpretations that came into existence, they brought in a further provision that for a particular contractor, if one contract does not exceed 20,000, but if the annual payments, all the other contracts totally put together exceeds 50,000, at that time the limit was 20 and 50, then you still need to deduct the tax. So they try to curb the malpractices and thereby avoid to bring back the tax, the contractor into the TDS net. Today's limit is 30,000 per contract, and annual total value for the same contractor is 75,000. So even if an individual contract does not exceed 30,000, if total amounts paid to that particular contractor exceed 75,000 in a year, the payer will need to deduct the tax at source. Rent paid for building, for land and building of a plant and machinery in excess of 1,80,000 per annum will attract a 10% tax as far as land and building is concerned, and as far as plant and machinery is concerned, it is 2%. Now here it is again interesting, because many of us may be having certain offices which we have given out on rent. In the past, what was happening was that again a very strict interpretation was taken that rent means rent for property, and it does not include rent for movable asset, for furniture, fixtures, the air conditioners, etc. So again, what intelligent people started doing, 1,80,000. So let us presume, suppose the rent fixed was say 12,000 per month. So 1,44,000. I'm not 12. Say 2 lakhs per annum for the whole year. It exceeds 1,80,000 limit. So what they did was they broke it up and said 1,50,000 is for the premises and 50,000 is for the other assets. 150 does not exceed 180, so no TDS. And that's how again people started playing mischief, to get out of the TDS net. So obviously when people try to avoid or evade taxes, the government will retaliate, and that's how we have this, that rent includes rent for not only premises but also the loose assets, and therefore now that particular issue has been covered. And therefore now I would feel that instead of getting into all this headache of splitting the rent agreement into two parts, for the property, for the other assets, it's better to have one particular rental agreement. Of course, that is subject to the issue of at a future date the municipal taxation going up because of the rent, but that is a different matter. From a tax perspective, it really doesn't matter. 194 IA, I mentioned 50 lakhs. Professional fees, I mentioned 30,000. Attracts 10%. On when you buy a house exceeding 50 lakhs, you have to deduct tax at 1% from the. So every time you make an installment payment to the builder, from that amount, 1% has to be deducted. Most of the builders, even HDFC and all the housing finance companies are now completely aware of this. When you take a loan itself or when you buy a house itself, they will give you a document saying that you are supposed to deduct tax. This is how you deduct. This is how much you deduct, etc. And it is all fairly well organized now, at least with the good quality people in this business. What we have to remember is that all these rates which we talked about, 10, 2, 1, 30, whatever it is, that is the only amount that is to be deducted. We generally have to pay a surcharge or a education cess in the normal course, but as far as TDS is concerned, those are not to be added. So for example, when you earn say 50,000 interest, the TDS will be 10% flat, which is 5,000, and not 10.3 or whatever the odd figure. That brings us to one very drastic provision of the Income Tax Act, which it would be good if you are aware of it, because maybe all of us in this room have a PAN, but some of our people back home, our family members back home may not have a PAN. There is a section 206 AA, and that says that when a payment is to be made, and if it is subject to TDS, meaning it is covered by any of the sections of TDS, then the person who is making the payment has to ensure that that other party to whom he is making the payment has a PAN. Then only all these rates will apply as per the section. If that other party does not have a PAN, then the tax to be deducted is at a higher rate of 20%. So in all you will see it is 10, 2, 1, etc. 2%. Only in this case it is 30%. So obviously where the rate is higher than 20, then the higher rate will apply. But otherwise, instead of 1%, 20%, instead of 10%, 20%, etc., etc. So this is a problematic one. So if many people, what they do is they transfer the FD from the husband's name to the wife's name, or to the mother's, senior citizen's name, and keep the FDs in their name and earn the interest in that name to split the income so that the tax liability comes down. But please remember that if that person does not have a PAN, and if by chance the interest exceeds the amount of the threshold, then instead of deducting at 10%, there will be a TDS of 20%. So you need to be careful about that. Software, I don't think it is, basically anybody would be interested in this, but there is a huge controversy about whether to deduct tax at source at the time of making payment for a software.
You are not supposed to pay for that company having that certificate for mining software.
Yeah, correct. But I think for a general thing is not of interest. As far as the due dates are concerned, so in the process flow we saw that the deductor deducts, then pays to the government. So when does he have to make payment to the government? If the tax is deducted in the month of April, the due date for payment to the government is 7th of May, and so on and so forth. Only in the month of March, the year end, when the financial year ends, all the TDS which is deducted in the month of March has to be paid to the government by 30th April. There is, in the process flow, there was also one step that after paying the tax to the government, we have to file quarterly TDS returns or quarterly TDS statements. The due date for that is for the first quarter, April, May, June. So when this particular current quarter of April to June 2016 ends, the deductors will have to file the TDS return by 31st July. For the next quarter by 31st October, 31st Jan, and for March by 31st May. So these are the due dates for filing the TDS returns and the payments. What forms, of course, as deductees, you are not concerned with what form that person has to fill in at the time of payment, but just for general knowledge, for information, at the time of payment, you need to fill in ITNS 281 and make payment. The e-filing for salary TDS returns is to be done in form 24Q, for all other TDS in 26Q, and if you have made payment to a non-resident and deducted tax, is form 27Q. The TDS certificates that we get as an end user, as the person from whose money tax has been deducted, are only of two types. In case of salaries, it is form 16. In case of all other payments, it is form 16A. Recently, or not very recently, but sometime in the last couple of years, the government has transferred the entire TDS administration from the earlier NSDL, earlier supplier vendor called NSDL, to itself, and that itself is then at the back end managed by Infosys. And Traces is the name of the website, Traces. And now the deductors have to mandatorily generate the TDS certificates from that Traces website. So that has been a fantastic step, because what was happening was that I have missed out the due dates for filing for issuing the TDS certificate, but there is a due date for issuing the TDS certificates also. So in the past, I still remember when I was practicing earlier, in my initial days, the TDS certificates were generally issued at the end of the year. After the end of the year, big thappa came, and the deductor used to sign and put the rubber stamp and then issue it. Now, the fact of the matter is that there is a due date for issuing the TDS certificate. If you have to deduct on a quarterly basis, you have to make payment you have to deduct on a monthly basis, make payment on a quarterly basis, file TDS returns on a quarterly basis. The certificates were also required to be issued on a quarterly basis, and there was a particular time limit. But practically everyone knew, the whole world knew, that they are all issued long after the due dates. And merely the date put on the certificate is the correct date, meaning without delay. To curb that, now what the brilliant people in the IT department of the income tax have done is that they have made it mandatory to issue the certificate through the system. So, for example, April, May, June of 2015, if my firm had deducted tax from some payment made to another professional and deducted tax and paid to the government, we have done everything right, but the certificate we have forgotten to issue. And if I do it today through the system, the certificate will bear today's date. So the government easily knows that I have delayed the issue of TDS certificate, and through the system itself I will get a notice for interest payment for the delay in issuing the TDS certificate. So this is something good, because this will bring everybody, bring discipline into the deductors. For companies and those who have a tax audit mandatory, for them tax has to be paid electronically and you cannot make physical tax payments. So that is something, again, it's a complete sea change which has happened in the last 10 years. Of course, the UPA government has brought this in, but I would feel that it is a great move, because now most of us have net banking. We are comfortable with dealing on the banking front on the internet. For payment of TDS on transfer of immovable property other than agricultural land, so as I said, everyone in this room would be covered if you buy a immovable property. So we will get a little scared that I'll have to start doing the TDS compliance, but it's not difficult. In fact, I think I have written one article in a previous issue of Money Life on this, that when you buy a property, how to go about the TDS compliance is fairly simple. If anybody is interested, we can share that article, or if it is not there, I'll share it with you. But basically, a form called 26QB has to be filled up. It is a Challan cum TDS return form. So everything is filled up only once by the buyer of the property, and then thereafter a form 16B is generated by the system itself. The buyer has to download it, sign it, and give it to the builder, to the person from whom he is buying the property. If you fail to deduct the tax, or after deducting fail to deposit the tax, then what are the consequences? The consequences are that there will be an interest payable at 1% per month from the date on which tax was deductible up to the date on which the tax is deducted, and 1.5% per month from the date of deduction up to the date of deposit. So this is a huge amount. This is a massive hit for the taxpayer, because if there is a default and if this interest is to be paid, this interest is not tax deductible. It's not a business expense. So it's a straight loss for the deductor. Then if you fail to furnish the TDS return in time, 200 per day is the penalty that one needs to pay. But subject to the amount of TDS. Sometimes what used to happen was TDS amount was 1000, and if you have made a default of 6 days, that 6 into 200, 1200 was more than the TDS itself. So they have restricted it luckily to the amount of TDS. Penalty is also applicable if deductor fails to furnish the TDS return even after 1 year from the due date. And the penalties for giving incorrect details in the TDS return, a maximum of 1 lakh can be levied. The penalty of up to 1 lakh can be levied between 10,000 and 1 lakh. So you can imagine that while the government has outsourced the revenue collection duty of itself to others, it is like forcing someone to do social work. You have to do social work. If you don't do, if you don't go from 5 to 6, you have to pay this. If you don't go from 2 to 3, you have to pay this. That kind of stuff. Which brings me to the extremely important part of understanding of how taxes are administered in the country. Form 26AS. Just for my info, how many of you have seen your Form 26AS, your own 26AS? Okay, so there are a few people who don't know about either don't know about 26AS or who have not paid attention to the 26AS. One spot of advice is that do not neglect this. This is a Bible, this is a Bhagavad Gita, this is a Quran for us, for taxpayers now. Just as when you have a bank account, you are very conscious and conscientious about your bank statement or the passbook. You have got to be similarly, sure about it, similarly interested in this particular document, Form 26AS. It's a like a passbook of tax payments for every taxpayer. So it is linked to your particular PAN account. So every taxpayer, every person who has a PAN in the country has necessarily got a Form 26AS. It's automatic. Only thing is, it is up to the particular person to have a look at it. The government can't force you to have a look at it. So they have made it available online. One has to log into the e-filing portal of the government, of the Income Tax Department, and download that particular Form 26AS. What does it contain? It contains the details of TDS deducted from income paid to you by others. It has the details of tax collected under the TCS system. It has details of the advance tax paid by you, if at all. It has the details of self-assessment tax paid by you at the time of filing the return. It has the details of regular assessment tax which you may have paid after your assessment gets over and some demand is raised by the department. It also, if a refund is due to you, then it has the details of the refund. If interest is paid to you in the case of NRIs, then that interest plus the TDS from the interest, all those details are given in the 26AS. Then there are also details of high value transactions in respect of shares, mutual funds, etc. So these are all contained in the Form 26AS. Why it is important? This was what is contained in the 26AS, but why am I saying that it is important for you to pay attention to it? The reason is that the government gives credit for tax to you as a taxpayer only if that amount is reflected in the 26AS. If it is not there in 26AS, you can do what you want. You can go and meet the Prime Minister in his Mann Ki Baat, but you will not get credit. Simple. Because everything is system driven. System doesn't listen to a good minister or a bad minister. System is configured to reject a claim for tax payment if that tax payment does not match with the Form 26AS. Period. So therefore, the credit is given based on 26AS. The organization which is deducting the TDS from your income will issue a TDS certificate to you after filing the TDS return. You can compare the Form 26AS with the TDS certificate. So we all get TDS certificates, hopefully. When we get the certificate, please ensure that it matches with the information given in the form which is appearing in your Form 26 AS. And if there is a if the amount of TDS as per 26 AS and the TDS certificate match, then it means that the credit reflecting in your Form 26 AS is correct. However, if the two don't match, if the amount in TDS certificate and the 26 AS there is a mismatch, then you need to definitely run to the tax deductor and point out the problem and ensure that that fellow rectifies the mistake which he may have made in the TDS return that he has filed. Now, some of the common reasons why there is a mismatch. One could be that that person has not paid the tax to the government. First, he deducted, but he is not paid to the government. So then, where is the question of him giving you a TDS certificate, filing the return, etc. Or second possibility is that he has paid the tax to the government, but has not filed the TDS return, and that is why it is not shown against your name. Third could be that he has done everything right. He has deducted the tax, paid the tax, filed the TDS return, but instead of putting your PAN, he has put somebody else's PAN, by mistake. There are various reasons why there could be a mismatch between the 26 AS and the TDS certificates. But so incorrect PAN, etc., or not quoted the PAN, etc., those could be the issues. So after you go back to the deductor and point out the mistake, hopefully he will revise the return, the TDS return, and then once the TDS return is revised by the deductor after making necessary correction, then the credit will get reflected in your Form 26 AS after a gap of some time. Therefore, it is extremely important for all of us to keep in mind the fact that before you file your return, please ensure that the tax as appearing in 26 AS matches with what you are claiming in your return. If you don't do that, see, in the olden days it was okay, because we all know that after filing the return for 2 years we never heard from the department. Now everything is done on the system, and some of you may have had this pleasant experience last year when we filed the returns for the year ended 31st March 2015, that the returns were filed in July, and in August people started getting the refunds into their bank account. The reason was that the Central Processing Center at Bangalore, which processes the e-filed returns, was given direction that this year you have to be extremely prompt and quickly issue the refunds. So within a few days of filing the return, they started processing the returns. And by processing, what do we mean? Processing is that they match the tax payments in the return with the 26 AS. If it matches, everything is fine. If you have a refund due to the taxpayer, give the refund to him. So now we are in a situation, we are living in times where at least the processing which is done electronically is done very fast, and therefore the moment you file the return, within a few days they will process it. At that point of time, if there is a mismatch between the information in the return and the information in the 26 AS, then you are in trouble, because they will then not give you credit for that particular tax. So this is bold, underlined, and double font size. The TDS certificates are being downloaded from Traces portal. I mentioned this earlier. Therefore, now the chances of mismatch between the TDS certificate and 26 AS are very remote, because the TDS certificates that get downloaded from the from the Traces portal are generated only after the TDS returns get filed properly by the tax deductor. So chances of mismatch are very, very less now, but sometimes they do happen. Sometimes it so happens that the amount of TDS credit appearing in 26 AS is more than the amount in the TDS certificates. And this happens because one or some of the deductors who have issued TDS on your behalf have not issued the certificate. This is the possibility that you may have not got the certificate, but tax has been deducted, it is appearing in your 26 AS. So your focus should now move from TDS certificates to 26 AS. Even if you don't get TDS certificate, don't worry too much, as long as the credit appears in your Form 26 AS. Okay, unclaimed TDS credit brought forward. So, we were, I was referring earlier to Mr. Datar when we were talking before this, that sometimes what happens is that there is I am a chartered accountant. To illustrate how these mismatches happen, that I am a chartered accountant. Most professionals like chartered accountant follow a cash system of accounting, meaning when we get our fees, we treat it as income. When we make a payment to somebody for expenses, we treat it as expense. It is not on accrual. So for example, the electricity bill of March 2016, it comes in April, we pay it in April. So even though it pertains to last year, we will treat it as expense of the current year because we paid it in April. Similarly, if I have raised an invoice on a client in March, but I get the fees in April or May, then it will be income of that subsequent year. So a cash system of accounting, what happens is that the income is accounted for in year 2 and not in year 1. But the person who has received my bill in the past, before March, he will deduct tax in March itself, because he has to, as I told you earlier, deduction is at the time of credit in the books or payment, whichever is earlier. So obviously he will treat it as his last year's expense. He will account for it in last year. So he has to deduct at that time. So when he files the TDS return for last year, last quarter of last year, he will show that TDS against my PAN. So in my 26 AS, that TDS will come for March 16. But I have got I am going to offer that income for tax in March 17, year ended March 17. So there is a mismatch between my return of income for financial year 15-16 as compared to my 26 AS for 15-16, and similarly there will be a mismatch when I file my next year's return, because the TDS is not appearing in my that year's form 26 AS. So there are all these kind of issues, and therefore there is a concept of brought forward unmatched TDS credit. When does the situation occur? TDS is deducted on advance payment, deductor follows mercantile method while deducting follows cash system. I give you that example. I also give you the reason. Now what to do in this kind of situations? So in the ITR form, there is a particular schedule called schedule TDS, and it has 2 columns: unclaimed TDS brought forward, where you have to give the details of the earlier year's financial year, the year and the amount, and the unclaimed TDS which is carried forward to the subsequent year. Both the possibilities are there, that you have brought forward some credit from earlier year, and in the current year there is a TDS which you are carrying forward to the subsequent year. So this was missing for years together, which was brought in I think last year or the earlier year, and this to some extent is a great relief for people like me wherever these mismatches happen. So you have to fill in the form, in the ITR form you have to fill up the figures properly. So for example, a client of mine has deducted say 10,000 rupees in March 2016. When but I am not, so in my 26 years the TDS will appear of 10,000. I have shown that income in the subsequent year. So when I am filing my return for March 16, I will show that 10,000 as TDS. Then I will say the amount that I am, so if you look at this, amount out of 6 or 7 being carried forward. So I will say TDS 10,000, amount claimed in the current year 0, and therefore amount carried forward to subsequent year 10,000. Or in the reverse situation where I am bringing forward something from last year, so in March 16 TDS is there, which I am going to offer for tax in subsequent year. So 16-17 when I file the return, I will say last year's TDS 10,000, amount claimed this year 10,000, and therefore now balance carried forward is 0. So this is the way they have tried to resolve the problem of mismatch of the TDS. Then we come to a very popular topic, 15G and 15H, where Mr. Datar also raised this point, and I answered in my usual jocular manner to Sucheta, and she forwarded it to Amitabh Kant and the Revenue Secretary. Now if at all they happen to meet me, I have had it. But anyway, 15G and 15H. First we need to understand the difference between two, because even amongst chartered accountants, if you ask many times, you don't know the difference. You ask whether I should fill G or H, many people don't know the difference. That's why I have devoted a slide to it. First of all, both these forms, whether G or H, can be filled only by individuals. So if you are a company, you can't give this form. If you are a partnership firm, you can't give this form. 15G can be, let's look at 15H first. 15H has to be filled up by a senior citizen. Senior citizen is someone who has completed the age of 60 anytime during the year, or who will complete the age of 60 during the particular year. So if you are talking about the current year, for example, financial year 16-17, if someone is as of just now aged 59 years, but the birthday will come in say March 2017. So somewhere during the year that person will cross the age of 60 and will therefore qualify to be a senior citizen for the whole year. So that person will have to file form 15H. So if you are a resident Indian and you are a senior citizen during the year, then you have to fill up form 15. But form 15 can be filled up only if the tax calculated on your total income is nil. So why the thrust is on total income is that many common man doesn't have doesn't give importance to the term total income, because for that person he doesn't know what is total income. Total income is the income as calculated under the Income Tax Act. So what is the difference? For example, you have a salary income of say 4 lakhs. You have put in money in your PPF, in your company PF, in your LIC premium, etc., in the equity linked savings scheme, all that kind of stuff, Mediclaim premium, etc., and you have all these deductions that you are entitled to. So 1,50,000 is the upper limit for the ETC deduction for PPF, etc., and another say 15,000 for the Mediclaim. So you have a 1,65,000, you have put all these monies into the respective places, and you are entitled to 1,65,000 deduction. So from 4 lakhs of salary, you deduct 165. So your total income is 2,35,000. When you are talking in a layman's term, your income is 4 lakhs. But for tax purposes, the total income is 2,35,000. So when the tax on that 2,35,000 or whatever is that income, whatever is that figure, if it is nil, then only you can file the 15H. And this is where the whole problem lies. Most people don't know that you are not supposed to be giving 15H in the first place, but they have been merrily giving away the 15Hs because, and typically what happens is that for senior citizens especially, when they go to the bank and that clerk sitting there sees a senior citizen walking in with a walking stick, the first thing he will say is, "Uncle, aap 15H de do." Not even asking that person whether he wants to give or not, whether he is allowed to give or not. This has actually happened in my own family member's case, so I'm talking with confidence. They sometimes force that person to give the 15H. I don't know why they do that, but anyway, if you are a senior citizen, if the income does not, total income, taxable income as calculated under the Income Tax Act does not exceed the threshold limit, then you are entitled to give the form 15H. Keep that in mind. That brings us to 15G. 15G again can be given, as I said, by by individual or HUF who is a resident Indian and who is not a senior citizen, so non-senior citizens. And if the tax calculated on your total income is nil, so far this is similar to 15H, but this is where the problem is. The last condition which is causing the problem which you also referred to, that total interest income for the year should be less than the basic exemption limit of that year. So in the same example that I gave, 4 lakh salary and 1,65,000 deduction, instead of that let us take 4 lakh bank interest, no other income. Interest on FD 4 lakhs, 1,65,000 is the deduction that you are going to claim, 150 for your PPF or whatever it is, and 15,000 for Mediclaim. Your income is 2,35,000. Had you been in this situation, you could have given. Here, so far you are satisfying the conditions. Problem is here. Problem is that your interest income is 4 lakhs, which is more than the threshold limit. You cannot give form 15G. And lastly, NRIs are not allowed to give, because if you see it is resident Indian. So NRI relatives of yours, there is no question of giving form 15G or 15H as the case may be. Now, what is it that we need to keep in mind while thinking about or talking about 15G and H? Just tell me where I'm running away. First of all, you have to ensure that you submit your PAN details to the bank while submitting the form 15G and H. Now, for various for reasons that I can't understand, in the form 15G and H, they ask you, I don't know how many of you ever bothered to fill up, and I wonder that if you have not, then who has filled up that? Assessing officer details. Where were you assessed for the last year? Last year, which was the year for which you were last assessed? I don't know how many of us are actually aware where we are assessed, first of all, and which was the last assessment order year for which you got the order. Those are the details that you need to fill up. Most of the time the banks take blank forms from you without those items filled in, and I don't know how they go about accepting those things. But anyway, at least ensure that the PAN is filled up properly in the form. I've talked about the consequences of not giving the PAN, that higher TDS rate of 20%. Then third important point, please keep in mind, is when you give the form to the bank, sometimes what happens is we take one copy, go there and give it, and then fellow, theek hai, and we go back. Please take the acknowledgement and ideally take a photocopy of the form and take the acknowledgement on that and keep that copy with you, because at a future date you may need that 15. One doesn't know when you will need it. So keep that with you. Try and give at the beginning of the year. Your banker will also be after you. The moment 1st April comes, the bankers run after you. Give your 15G, 15H, whatever it is. Because if any interest is due to you in the month of April and you have not yet given the form, then they will be forced to deduct the tax, because they cannot not deduct unless you have given form 15G or H. So this is something that we need to keep in mind. In case the bank deducts the tax in spite of the fact that you have submitted the form or before you actually submit the same, please remember, bank is not going to give you back the TDS unless you are really friendly with that bank manager and he's somehow adjust that TDS against some other fellow and all that. But practically, theoretically that cannot happen. Practically you may be able to manage somehow or the other, and which is one reason why we have the public sector mess, bank mess that we have at present. So therefore the only option available for you in that case would be to file your tax return and claim that TDS in your return and claim the refund from the government. Every form that you give, 15G or H, is valid only for 1 year. That is why you are aware that every year you need to give it. If you want to apply for nil TDS in the new financial year, you will have to again submit the forms in the next year. This is where most people go wrong. The 15G and H are meant to prevent TDS and not to avoid tax payment. So it's a facility provided to those people in whose case tax is not payable, to allow the deductor to not deduct the tax and make the payment to that person without TDS, so that the deductee is not put to hardship because of the TDS and unnecessarily does not have to claim the refund of tax. It is not a mechanism given to you to try and avoid the tax payment. It is only a way of avoiding unnecessary deduction of tax when you are not supposed to pay the tax. You will be required to file a tax return if your total income before the deduction is above the tax exemption limit. This is, of course, this is nothing to do with TDS, but this is again a huge misconception in the mind of the common man, that if my income does not exceed threshold limit, I don't need to file the return. It's not that. In the same example that I give you, 4 lakh income, 1 lakh 65 deductions, 2 lakh 35 the final income. Below threshold limit, that does not mean that you don't have to file the return. You still need to file the return, because the exemption or the exclusion from filing the return is only if your gross income before deductions is below the threshold limit. So we need to keep that in mind. Now, this is where the fun begins for the current year. The forms have undergone a change this year, the 15G and H. And in the new forms, we have to give, so suppose I have a fixed deposit with HDFC Bank and I have another fixed deposit with, say, Canara Bank. When I go to give form 15G to the HDFC Bank, in the form I have to give details of, and this was not the case last year, but this year I have to give the details of the FD kept with Canara Bank also. That detail has to be filled in the form which I give to HDFC, and vice versa, when I give to Canara, I have to give the details of the deposit with the HDFC Bank. So every 15G or every 15H that you give, you have to give details of all the fixed deposits kept. And most of the banks themselves don't know what is the actual position, that what are the details to be filled out, and so there is one column where you have to give the total income for this year. The total, which is how much you are likely to earn in the year. So there is, at one place where I went, the banker insisted that after adding all the interest of all the banks put together, that total should not exceed 2.5 lakhs, which is the threshold limit. I started arguing with the banker, and then finally that manager agreed that okay, you put up to 3.5 lakhs because you are going to get 1 lakh deduction under chapter 80, under section 80C. So that banker agreed for 3.5 lakhs. Somewhere else they refusing, no, it has to be only 2.5 lakhs. So the bankers themselves are not very clear about what is the correct position. The interest, then the other problem that we have, not to do with 15G or 8, but at the time of filing the return and trying to match the TDS, is that interest which you get from the bank on FDs, on savings account, it is okay because you actually get it into your bank, there is no question of mismatch. But interest on FD, there are 3 types of figures that you can get. One is what you actually get into your bank account, what is credited into your bank account during the year. Second is, many banks, if you ask for, they will give you an interest certificate. So on the letterhead they will print your name and say that during the year we have this much is the interest which we have paid to you or which accrues to you. So that is the second figure of interest. And the third is what comes in your 26 AS. And chances are very high, 99.9%, that all 3 are different figures. There are various reasons for that. For lack of time we cannot get into that. But the question that you will ask is that, you are talking of theory, practically what you do, which interest figure to take. Now Mr. Datar referred to a particular case where the CA told that person that forget everything, you go by the 26 AS and take the figure appearing in form 26 AS. Now I would also like to take that stand, though theoretically it may not be correct, but at the end of it, practically what you do. So the way I look at it is that even in my own case, when I try to match the TDS, it never matches every time, and luckily I don't take the interest certificate, so I don't have a problem of 3 mismatches. I go by 26 years, I go by what has come into my bank account. One option which I myself have now started doing, which may not be to your liking, but for me it works fantastic, is that I always keep my fixed deposit, start a fixed deposit on 1st April of every year, and I keep it only for 363 days. Every year. I get lower interest because obviously the rate of interest will be lower, but I ensure that on 29th March, 30th March, whatever it is, the money gets credited back into my bank account. On 1st April again I put the FD. So the problem of interest accrued on the FD never arises. There is never a mismatch in my case as far as TDS and interest both are concerned, because that interest will come into my bank account on 28th March when the FD matures. On 31st March there is no outstanding FD, so no interest accrued, all the headaches are not there. 1st April again I put the back. I lose out that 1 or 0.5% or 0.75% of interest because the rate is lower, but I am saved the trouble of wasting my time on trying to match everything. This is one very simplistic option, may not appeal to everyone. The other option therefore is that which figure do you take, how to resolve the issue. Taking the form 26 AS figure is the simplest option, because then you don't have a headache. The system that is going to process your tax return at the CPC end will match the two. If it matches, you sail through. So Mr. Datar, I would say that the advice given by the CA is a practical advice. I am not defending my fraternity, but unfortunately that seems to be the only way out. The main reason why these problems arise is that the banks have to follow an accrual system of accounting. Now accrual can be interpreted in 2 ways. Quarterly, June, April to June, July, September. So 30th June, 30th September, 31st December, 31st March, they will pass entries in their books for the cumulative interest that is accumulated, deduct tax and pay to the government. But because your FD is you have kept it on a growth cumulative basis, you are not going to get that money. It is only their accounting entry. So they pass the entry, they pay the tax, matter is over. But you will get it next year or after 2 years or 3 years, whatever, when the FD matures. That is in case of cumulative FDs. Even if it is not cumulative and say the interest payouts are half yearly or quarterly or whatever it is, there will still be a mismatch if you have kept the FD at an odd date somewhere during the year. Then on 31st March you may not get the interest, you will get on say 7th April, 7th May, whatever it is. So in this kind of situation, there are 101% there will be a mismatch. The only way to resolve it is that take as per 26 AS and then sleep, and if your case comes up for scrutiny, you take the stand that at the end of it, look at my 3-year period, gross interest I have got so much for the FD of 10 lakhs over the 3-year period. I have shown this much in year 1, this much in year 2, this much in year 3. Total amount tallies with the total interest. Total TDS tallies with the total TDS. I have not done any hanky-panky. This I am sure, I mean, if anyone comes to me as a client, I will defend you. This is the way practically you can get out of this particular issue of the mismatches. But again, coming back to 15G, 15H, there is an issue, because now the stupidity is that they want you to give the FDR numbers in the form itself and how much interest you are going to get. So you have to calculate the interest and put that figure, but the problem is not that. The problem is that when you are giving on 3rd April, 1st April, whatever it is, you may have 3 FDs. What happens if you put a new FD during the year? Then that means that again you have to fill up a new form 15G or 15H, put the new details of the new FD in that and again submit it to the banker. I would have felt that it makes more sense that at the beginning of the year I anticipate what will be my total interest, just put a lump sum amount without giving the details and give it to the bank, and as long as the interest does not exceed that figure, bank can happily accept that and not deduct tax. That was a happy situation, but now it has become complicated. Coming to some of the popular misconceptions, so as I referred earlier, let's understand the basics of income tax. Some people say that bank has deducted tax from my interest and therefore I don't have to pay any more tax. Nothing can be further from the truth. The reason is that we as individuals, as I said earlier, attract tax on a slab rate. Depending on which slab, 10%, 20%, 30%. Now if I am in the top slab, my total income is more than 10 lakhs, then I have to pay tax at 30% on the amount which exceeds 10 lakhs. Between 5 and 10, whatever is that income, so on 5 lakhs I have to pay 20%. But presuming that I have, for example, 11 lakhs of FD interest and no other income, okay, my bank will deduct 10% on 11 lakhs, so 1,10,000 would have been deducted totally. I can't take a stand that because TDS has been deducted by the bank, I don't have to pay any more tax, because my liability is not 1,10,000. My liability will be much more than that. On 5 lakh itself, 20% is 1 lakh. On 1 lakh above 10 lakhs, it is 30, so 30,000. So 1,30,000 it is just there. 2.5 to 5 lakhs, 10% is another 25. So my liability is much more than the TDS that the bank has deducted. I therefore have to pay the tax. So this is a wrong understanding or a misunderstanding in the minds of a lot of people. Then my income comes to me after TDS, so I don't need to file my return. Again, absolutely wrong interpretation. My employer deducts tax from my salary and I don't have any other income, so I don't need to file my return. We get a lot of salaried people who come to us saying, and they say this especially to negotiate the fees, saying that my case is very simple, I get only salary income, I have no other income. Now I ask him, do you get cash salary and keep only at home, or do you put it in your bank? If you put in your bank, obviously you will get interest income. That is taxable. So where is the question of you saying I don't have any other income? You have claimed 80C by investing in National Savings Certificate. What happens to the interest on that? No. So this is another popular misconception. Last, I have given form 15G or H to the bank, therefore I don't have to pay tax. Again, that's not the correct position. 15G and H may have been given by mistake or even correctly, but that does not necessarily mean that you don't have to pay tax or you don't have to file the tax return. Coming to the end, we need to be very, very careful. Uncle Sam, the Income Tax Department, the Government of India is watching us. Everything is digital. Now our Prime Minister is digital. Our ministers are becoming digital. They are all online. Most of the stuff is online. Everything that you do in the world today, in the country today, is PAN based. You go to buy something, you have to give a PAN. You may be aware that in the budget there was a provision that when you buy certain goods also, above I think 1 lakh or 2 lakh, the PAN has to be quoted over there. So everything is PAN based. Your PAN, so you invest in mutual fund, you have to give a PAN. You invest in FD, you have to give a PAN. Everything is PAN based. Therefore, the government is, and based on that PAN, lot of agencies have to report huge amounts of information to the Income Tax Department. They are getting not MBs, not GBs, but TBs in terms of data size. on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis from various sources. And there is a full-fledged department sitting in Bangalore in the income tax department which is analyzing the data. Their job is only to analyze the data. And I have first-hand information about this because my firm is helping them in this analysis of the data because we have a data analytics team. They are analyzing this data. So some examples we have got is that some people have been depositing cash across the country, across branches of different banks, running into crores and crores, and they don't have a PAN. This kind of things are happening in the country, but the government is aware of this. The tax department is aware of this, and now they are working on a plan of how to go after all these people.
But anything more than 50,000, you cannot qualify more than.
But it's still happening. It's still happening. Yeah.
Cooperative bank.
Yeah. Correct. So these kind of things have been happening. The data, the particular department of the income tax department is analyzing this data very, very carefully. And the AIR report that I mentioned, the annual information reports, which mutual funds have to submit, credit card companies have to submit, banks have to submit, companies which come out with IPOs have to submit, stock exchange, through the stock exchange, the brokers have to submit. All these agencies have to report the AIRs to the income tax department. Again, in that AIR, everything is PAN based. So if I buy shares, tax department knows. If I buy mutual fund, they know. If I spend credit card more than 2 lakhs, they know. If I buy a car exceeding a particular amount, they will know. Everything is available to them. Don't be under the impression that you can get away with anything. It's very, very difficult now. At least they are aware of it. Now whether they take action on it, that's a different matter, but they are aware of this. So the AIR reports are matched with your return of income. All this is happening electronically. So when you report interest income in your ITR, it is matched electronically with the AIR filed by the bank. If you show capital gains from mutual fund, they will try to match it with the AIR filed by the mutual fund to see whether the transactions match. The 26 AS is also, as I said earlier, also it is matched with your return of income. All this is happening electronically. So it's not merely about tax, it is also about the income that you show in the return of income. So one needs to be extremely careful about whether you show or don't show, whatever you decide, be careful, be aware that it's very, very different world that we are living in today. Just a last thought, because many times we have come across people who are cursing the other person for deducting the tax. That guy has deducted, and as if he has done a crime. I'm not defending anyone, but I'm just trying to see, for a moment, put yourself across the table in the deductor's shoes. Why are they so conservative? So very, very lightly, informally speaking, if someone comes to me for advice on TDS, and if I have a doubt whether to deduct or not, my advice will be deduct. If I have a doubt about which section to apply, which rate to apply, if I have a doubt, I will say you take the highest rate. That will be my advice. Now, if a CA is advising like that, that guy is obviously going to take that particular stand. So why are the deductors taking a conservative stand? The reason is that if there is a default of TDS, the entire expense gets disallowed in their hands. So if a company makes a payment of professional fees to someone like me and forgets to deduct tax, that fees will not be allowed as an expense to that company. Not only that, the company will have to pay interest for the TDS default. Then it will have to pay penalty. And lastly, there could be prosecution against that deductor. So when these kind of consequences are there, which person in his right mind will be very casual about it? Of course he will be conservative, of course he will be extra careful about the TDS provisions, and therefore when you are about to curse someone for deducting tax, think of these things that person will face if he or she or it does not deduct the tax properly. So this is one thing. So if you are a deductor, finally I would say that deduct and remit without failure, avoid interest, penalty, prosecution and disallowance with due care, file the TDS returns and issue the forms within the time. Then there is a possibility that the deductor and the deductee will experience it. Thank you so much.